Hello, everybody. We will just be starting to get started soon. We're just letting people in. All right, so we're going to get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. Welcome to the Morissette Institute of Entrepreneurship workshop for today. We have Eric Morse and Paul Hubert here ready to give a presentation and a fireside chat, I should say, on what investors or funders are looking for in social enterprises. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric and Paul for our session. And just to note, the session is being recorded and will be available on demand after. Thank you, Eric.
Great. Thanks so much, Ruth. Really appreciate it. As Ruth said, my name is Eric Morse. I'm the Executive Director of the Morissette Institute for Entrepreneurship, and really delighted to be a part of the World's Challenge, and especially delighted to be joined today by Paul Hubert. Just going to give him a quick introduction, and then we will just kind of dive right into the topic, which I find really interesting right now. Paul Hubert is the CEO of Pathways Employment here in London, Ontario, and they help people unleash their potential through employment, skill training, and advocacy. Paul really is a pioneer in social enterprise and regularly contributes to policy and practice development. He's a highly sought after consultant who helps clients assist clients in achieving their strategic goals and long-term alignment and sustainability. He is the lead consultant with Delta Leadership Consulting. Paul spent 7 years in Latin America, so really getting a sense of the global climate, helping leaders there and businesses rise to their potential. Until recently, Paul served as the Deputy Mayor of the City of London and brought thoughtful leadership to the public realm for over 12 years. He served on numerous boards of directors. Paul holds an MA in psychology, focused on the process of change, and he's a senior fellow with the Network of Economic and Social Trends here at Western University. So with that, Paul, I'm just delighted to have you here, and we're just gonna have a discussion today. Paul is our expert for sure, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end where we can field some questions and whatnot. So Paul, I just want to, let's start with some definitions. How do you define a social enterprise?
Well, thanks. It's great to be here. And boy, it'd be great if we were in a lecture hall together and we could have fun and kind of go back and forth. But very simply, a social enterprise is, in my definition, is any earned income business or strategy undertaken by a nonprofit for the purpose of twofold: generating revenue and supporting the nonprofit's social mission or its social ends. So I define it as really being in the nonprofit realm in terms of social enterprise. Some may define it a little differently and include what we would call social purpose businesses. And what's the difference between the two? In some senses, it's really around ownership. Who owns the business, if you will? And social purposes business may be sole proprietorships, they may be partnerships, they may have other governance things. Nonprofits are owned technically by the community and are governed by a volunteer set of directors. So it's really a difference of governance, if I could put it that way, that would define those two.
Yeah, I agree completely, Paul. Maybe an emphasis on benefits to the community first versus sustainability or returns with benefits to the community as the second. But there's so much crossover between that boundary that I like your governance definition better. Frankly, I think that's great.
And sometimes it's really interesting. I've worked with one social purpose business for many years that actually. And then she sold the business. Interesting, right? So
yeah, for sure.
And she had built up a great brand here in the city of London, and it had a social end. But then some of that sustainability stuff, and she got out of the game, if you will.
Wow. So, is there a difference in your mind? I know there is, but let's define what it is and talk about it a little bit, between investing in social startups versus investing in some other type of startup in the tech sector or otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually have my son's in the tech sector, and he's in the what I would call, he is out west, but it's the wild, wild west of tech startups. And getting venture capital and attracting capital. He's took one company in 12 months from 6 million valuation to 60 million, and then they fired him. So it's like it really is the wild, wild west. I think there's a broader context of evaluation of what the purpose is, and of course there's not that kind of capital available for that, because investors are looking for much more narrowly defined return on their investment. So over the years, I've kind of developed a three-pronged format for evaluating social impact. And it really starts from a perspective of a social impact, and that's what drives a social enterprise in a sense, is what good can we do for what people at what cost? So that's the first driver on it.
Yeah. So as an investor or a funder, I'm using both terms here, of a social enterprise, it's primarily finding somebody that's going to align with that cause, that purpose that you're building this for. And then I assume different investors have different kind of draws. Am I investing in my local community, or am I investing in something that can scale and solve a global problem?
Yeah, the scalability issue is a real challenge, because while we want to act local and yet have a global impact, it's really tough to have those macro impacts on systems. And I know that people that are a part of this program are looking at the UN's sustainability outcomes and those sorts of things. For us, one of the first elements of it that our board of directors asks is really around people. And we have a mission, and as nonprofit charities, unleashing the potential of people is the most important part of us. And so our mission always has been around employment. So we have a series of questions, and we ask the question, first of all, does this initiative align with our mission, and does it align with our values? So, for example, we would never probably get into a lottery situation or a gambling outfit because it doesn't align with our values as an organization. We would, so does it align with your mission, vision, and values? Of course, if you're running something that doesn't do that, you might lose your charitable status under the CRA.
Right.
So there's some governing risk management things that have to happen. Is it consistent with core values? And then will it benefit our core clients? And I'll give an example, Eric. 15, 20 years ago, my associate executive director and myself we're both HR specialists. I'm on the organizational development side. He's on the tactical HR stuff. We were pulling in to our bottom line at Pathways $50,000 a year net, straight to bottom line. Our board of directors said, guys, we want you to shut that down. It's not serving our core clients. You're working with the C-suite. You're working with senior managers. That's not the clients that we're here to serve.
Yeah.
And I had a very compelling argument why we should continue to do that, but I did not win the day because they did not see that social enterprise, if you will, as being aligned with our core clients and values.
Yeah, and I think that is the real key here when you're looking for somebody to help get your venture off the ground, whether it's social enterprise or other. But you have to find somebody with that alignment that's really looking to serve this purpose. But then you understand that when you bring them on, that's the purpose we're going to serve, because that's why they joined up, is that they believe in the same thing that you do in trying to add social benefits here.
I think the other criteria, Eric, is around the financial piece. And years ago, I used to do a workshop entitled "Yes, You Are a Business, Start Acting Like One."
Yeah.
And and this is, respectfully, this is in the early to mid 2000s, and nonprofits and charities, they didn't have an HR plan. They didn't have a marketing plan. They didn't have a finance plan. And so if you're starting a venture, one of the questions, does it diversify our funding? Or are we going to the same well over and over and over again? Is there market demand? Like who will, people talk about strategic planning. You've done plenty yourself.
Yeah.
If you have a good and a service, you better figure out who's willing to buy it from you and pay you good money for it. Because if you're going to get into the social purpose business or the social enterprise, it's not a handout. You're not a panhandler for money. You have to compete.
Yeah.
And I've competed and had critique from businesses. You have to compete on price. You have to compete on quality, and you have to compete on service. And if you can't compete on those things, and it's no different than any, Procter & Gamble, 3M, whatever, duct tape has got to stick, man. Like it's got to work.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
So you have to compete on that basis. So it is real business. It is not charity.
I think that's too many really wonderful people, well-meaning, wanting to really help the world lose sight of that, and that is from a funding side, from an investing side, or from a funder side. There is a limited amount of money, and so I want to figure out how my money is going to do the most good towards what I believe in. And so, right, in a social enterprise, moving a cause forward. Look, you got to understand that as an investor, I'm going to see 100 different ways to do that. And so I really have to look at it hard and say, which one do I think will be able to execute against this the most effectively and be around long enough, to deliver on the promise that they're making. And so I 100% agree with you. And I think the sophistication in investors has changed tremendously over those couple decades.
And you need to comment funder versus investor. So I think, if you're in the tech world, there's an ROI that's being expected. Right. I think funders, and in fact, when we started our second social enterprise, there was no funders. There was none of these angel funds or any of that sort of stuff out there. It just was not available. So we took it from our own reserve fund and invested that way. But the value of it was, we need to see that it was going to at least make a break even. So what's the long-term trajectory of that is, we're going to achieve our mission, but we're not going to be having to come back to the well every year. If I'm coming back to the well every year, it's a donation.
Yeah.
Not an investment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that particular venture is still ongoing. It's in its 11th year. COVID has kicked the slats out of it a little bit. It's been tough go because we serve a lot of nonprofits who have really shut down.
Yeah.
But we've looked at the ROI in terms of wages paid out, employment given, leadership developed, clients served, those sorts of clients being people who paid us money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are our clients.
Yeah.
And general reputation. So when we talk about return on investment in the social enterprise world, it's not it's not just the linear financial ROI. There's a social ROI. And that's where I think the community piece comes in, which is our third criteria, by the way. So we've got our people, we've got our finances, and then we've got the community. And is it innovative? Does it bring distinct value to our community? Does it, in some ways, our social enterprises have gotten far more PR for our organization over the years than our core business.
Yeah.
It can, I'm drawing a blank, Norton and Kaplan's famous book around
Balanced scorecard.
Balanced scorecard. Thank you. We'll fill in each other's blanks here. But it really is a balanced scorecard in terms of looking at the broader context of social impact. And I think you can measure that.
Yeah. Interesting.
One of the other ones, if I could, is the partnerships and collaborations that come out of it. When you're starting a for-profit enterprise, you're kind of not buddying up with the guy who's in the same space, unless you're trying to do a joint venture or a merger or an acquisition. Yeah. But when we're doing this work, there's collaborations and partnerships that come out of that. That's a little different. And I can give you examples of that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's more about leveraging the whole system, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up some interesting things. I think when I'm thinking about, an investor versus a funder, and, to me, it's a gray area, but I think you have, the funders that are looking for impact and, most benefit to the purpose possible. And then secondly is that sustainability of this, like, can they really do this and will it be sustainable? Whereas an investor is looking probably on the sustainable financial return first, and then social purpose entrepreneur I'm talking about. And then, the benefit second, but important, still very important in that balanced scorecard piece. But I think for both of them, whether it's a funder or an investor, because funders have become so much more sophisticated and inundated with more and more ideas, opportunities for their funding, that innovation piece, I think, is critical, to the investor, just like it is to the funder. What are you bringing new to this that can really change the game here, that we could scale or otherwise? But what's the innovation? And then, the second thing they are looking at is, do you have all those other resources in place to make this happen? and what's missing. And then I also think that investors want more today than in the past, Paul, and I'd love to get your perspective on this. I feel like they more and more want to play a part somehow beyond just the check they're writing. They want to help mold some aspect of this. Maybe it's bring in a partner, build that partnership with somebody else. Maybe it's to help with a specific piece, but I find they're more active now. Do you see that?
I see that to some degree, particularly, I'll give a huge shout out to community foundations, both in London, but across Canada, that are really saying, we want to figure out how we tackle some of the stubborn problems in our society. How do we address homelessness? How do we address the addictions crisis? How do we deal with mental health? And what they're doing from an investment point of view, and it really moves us into the world of program evaluation, is what are the metrics that we're going to track? So yes, we're going to be tracking revenue and sustainability metrics in that way, but how are you measuring, if you say you're dealing with men's mental health, for example? I have I have a community wood shop that is a nonprofit community workshop.
Okay.
And one of the targets is men's mental health, because they retire and they don't know what to do, or they're isolated or whatever it happens to be. How are you going to measure that? Well, I said, the first thing is you don't tell men that it's about men's mental health. That's the first thing you do. But the second thing is, how do we measure that? How do we measure? And that's what the funders are looking for. So you have to be pretty creative on your metrics in terms of attacking it. So balanced scorecard, in a very broad sense of the word, allows us to do that. And so that it's not just a financial, but then they want to hear the story. And one of the things we're learning in one of the research projects I'm on with Western is, how do we tell the story of businesses, of social enterprises? How do we tell the story of change in people's lives as well? How do we highlight that? And they want a feel-good piece. They want an engagement piece, for sure. But we need to have them engaged in some meaningful way.
Yeah, it's such an important part, and everyone that's on our webinar this afternoon is going to be giving a pitch over the next little while, and the storytelling is so important to that, because again, these funders have options in what to do with their investment, an investment for social benefit, but a story can make it compelling. A story can make not just the rational piece, which you'll have to lay out, but the emotional piece as well. And so I think that storytelling is so important, especially to social enterprise.
I was unsuccessful in a grant application, and you don't feel too badly that they have, for every dollar that they have to allocate, they have $20 of ask. So a $1 million or a $1.5 million will have $30 million of ask, and you kind of go, okay, I get you can only do so much, right? And you create the compelling pace. And critical to that, I would say, if you're writing funding proposals, and we're quite successful at it, is really dialing into what it is that lights the fire. Since this is a fireside chat, lights the fire of the funder. Like, what is their priority? What is the language that they're speaking? And scaling up and scaling out is one that we've actually been successful on. And sometimes it may not be here's the other thing is, we all love to say we learn a lot from failing, because we all know that a lot of businesses fail. They don't all make it. And boy, globally, are we going to see some change in the landscape in the next 6 to 12 months? But did we learn something? And there's some funders out there that are saying, we will fund innovation, recognizing that it may not do it. We may not get there, but what we may learn from that, we have one funder that we just went through a unification merger in the nonprofit world. Funder funded it, but my report back is, what did you learn? Because we want to create this body of knowledge. When we ran probably one or two nonprofit construction companies in Canada, people wanted, what did you learn from that? I learned that running a construction company when you're a psychologist is a lot of work. And I loved it, but I would start my day with a hard hat and work boots on and ended in a shirt and tie at council.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like, what did you learn?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do we, because there's a body of knowledge out there.
Yeah. And I think, there are a lot of investors like that. They're looking for a portfolio of investments that are attacking the same problem, but from different angles, right?
Yeah.
And with different innovations. And then they can monitor what's working, what's not, and start to combine resources towards those things that are working. So absolutely, I think we're seeing that more and more in the market as well. You talked about innovation. We talked about adequate resources to be successful. I'm working down the rational side as opposed to the emotional side here a little bit. But the other thing that I think we too often forget when we're pitching our social enterprise piece is that I'm going to call it go to market, because that's what we call it in the for-profit side. But it's the same idea. How are you going to get to those people that you want to serve, and how are you going to execute and make it happen? And I think too often we gloss over that, and the funders are left with, well, I love the idea, but I just don't know if you're the ones that can execute on this. And so how do we help people get past that?
If you don't have an execution strategy, don't bother pitching.
Yeah. Just that.
And the other thing is, this is a panel of one with you and I today.
Yeah.
But I've sat on many panels where it's what I would call the talking heads, who can talk about the concept of social enterprise. And I'll tell you a story. One of these panels, someone didn't show up. They pulled me literally out of the audience because you know something about this. It was all talking heads. I said, it's all well to talk. We run a social enterprise cleaning company. But at 10 o'clock tonight, I have an employee who's failing, and I have to go and teach them how to clean a toilet properly.
Yeah.
And there's only one way you teach someone how to clean a toilet.
Yeah. You literally
have to show them.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing I paid attention when my mother taught me how to clean a toilet, if you know what I mean, right? And I know that's a little gritty, but running a small business, which is what most social enterprises is not an easy thing to do. It doesn't always happen 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock or 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And so you have to have a staffing plan. You have to have an execution plan. You have to understand the equipment that you're going to need, your capital startup. And in that sense, it is no different than any other business. I flash back to my first director and I learning how to run a cleaning business and graffiti removal business. And we still just kill ourselves laughing about how stupid we were, and the things that we learned. But, you have to be willing to do the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to run a small business. And funders, if they're smart, will ask you about that execution plan. And it can't be a wing and a prayer.
Yeah, I agree. And I prefer naive to stupid, Paul, because when you learn, you're naive, you learn.
Well, I prepared to call myself stupid and everybody else naive because we did do a few stupid things.
Yeah. And hey, you know what? I think that is a key to success in that whole range of entrepreneurship, from social enterprise to for-profit, is that those that really succeed are those that learn the fastest. And I say that because you just don't know. No matter how good a plan you put together, no matter how well you think you know the problem space that you're solving, once you get out there and you start executing, it's not going to go the way you think. And so, that flexibility, that resiliency, that willingness to learn and pivot is so important to all entrepreneurs. And I think that's what a lot of funders will push you on, is just to see, have you thought through things? Have you thought through the what ifs side of the equation? Let me just switch gears.
Actually, just on that little story, I remember my intro to the business professor in 1980, Eric, and I don't remember a whole lot from that course. It's been too long,
Sure.
But I remember one thing: you got an A, you got a B+ if you had a good plan, but you got a A if you had a contingency plan.
Nice.
So, and she was a great prof. We really enjoyed her, but it was having a plan B. And I would say that she stopped short. You need a plan C and a plan D as well.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing that I want to kind of push on that again, the rational side of the things that you're going to have to hit for a funder is, tell me how you're going to measure success, and tell me why that's the right measure for this particular enterprise. Do you have good answers for that, or is it dependent on each individual venture, or some things they can think about?
Yeah, certainly on, probably the toughest, because we have self-funded a lot of our early startups, my board of directors are the people asking those tough decisions.
Yeah.
And choosing your board of directors, and I would say many, I have for-profit businesses that I work with, and I act as their voice of asking the tough questions, and they want to know, how are we doing, how are we measuring this? And it can't be things like holding hands and singing Kumbaya. They want to know, okay, so what are our sales targets? What's our profitability on this? How many people are we employing? Are we paying them a living wage? Those are the tough metrics that they want to see. Are we penetrating the right market? Who are we selling to? Those sorts of things. And they've been tough. Funders themselves always are asking now, what are the outcomes? How do we know that that's happening? And we're doing a lot more probably now than I did 10 years ago, not just process outcomes, but outcomes in terms of employment, people getting jobs, job retention, 3-6 month retention numbers, those sorts of things.
Yeah. To me, again, and I think that's all absolutely right, Paul, is, here's the problem. Here's what you say is the issue that you want to help us, solve, eliminate, whatever the case may be. And so I want to have a sense for really how you're going to measure that success. So what are the concrete things that you're going to look at to say we're successful? And my next question is, well, how do I know those are the right numbers? What's the baseline? How do we know that my investment in you for this social enterprise is moving the needle, and it's not just happening for other reasons? I think that, again, I do believe funders are getting a lot more sophisticated. They're demanding much more feedback in terms of, okay, monthly, quarterly, annually. I want to know that I'm making a difference here. That's why I'm involved.
Some of them are doing a good job at that, and some of them they're actually paying money to outsourced program evaluators, and they're coming up with metrics.
Yeah.
And then they're shocked that the people who are participants in whatever be the program of social enterprise are non-responsive to it, because often their metrics are not lining with what the client thinks they're buying.
Right. Right.
So, give you an example, I was part of starting up a nonprofit grocery store in Old East Village. We actually put $50,000 into it as an investor. Unfortunately, it lasted for about 5 years and then it closed. But some of the things that we were looking at, in terms of, do I measure what the customer is getting, or am I measuring what the employee is getting? And it gets a lot more complex than that, but we were tracking everything from average sale. And if you go to your average grocery store, the average sale is probably, in the hundreds of dollars, and our average sale never broke 20. And it just, people were using it more like a corner store that had really good prices than they were using it as a grocery store. And I wasn't on operations, but you have to be thinking through what are those metrics that we need to be tracking.
Yeah, for sure. Completely agree with that. I'm going to save a little bit of time for questions from folks. I see that we're starting to get a couple as we go, but I want to congratulate everybody that's involved with this contest. And I think that it is this generation, Paul, and I'm sure you're, feeling some vindication in some ways, is really driving change in the world. And we're seeing it in every investment form, for profit or otherwise, is starting to ask entrepreneurs for their ESG plan, and that is equity, sustainability, governance. What are those policies? How do I know that I'm investing in somebody that wants to pay a fair living wage, that's not going to damage the environment, that is in fact doing good, for people in a general sense? And you had a really interesting comment when we talked about this the other day, that it's not just on the investment, but you're seeing it in other places as well, procurement decisions or otherwise. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, or.
Yeah, there's two threads of work that's happening in Canada. One is socially responsible procurement, or social impact procurement, and then community benefit agreements. So let me give you an example. Your municipality spends, London, city of 400,000, spends $1 billion a year in the community. That's not including boards and commissions. And so, for example, on a road project, what's the community give back? So they could be buying lunches or catering from a small nonprofit that's creating employment for at-risk youth, for example.
Right.
Actually, part of this came out of the Olympics in Vancouver. And, all the flowers that were given out for medalists came from the east side of Vancouver, out of social enterprises. And they built that into the procurement, catering, you can imagine, all sorts of things.
Sure.
But on construction projects, it's fascinating. We go into an affordable housing project that's run by the municipality, and we hire contractors to renovate the townhouses, and we bring them in from outside of the municipality, and they don't have anybody, and yet there's people in that same housing complex that would love to have the opportunity, or could be trained to do the landscaping, or could be trained to do the cleaning. And now we create this full circle thing where, oh, I just fixed that, or my brother-in-law fixed that. You're going to take some pride in this thing.
Yeah.
Because this is part of me, right? And so socially responsible procurement, and I did 5 years ago, I did a Rick Mercer rant that I sent to you, and the buying power of municipalities and government, if it could be turned to do that at a micro level. See, every penny that gets spent on a social enterprise in my community that comes through our cleaning business, it doesn't go into an RRSP or a long-term savings plans. It actually gets reinvested because people need it to live. They need it to buy shoes and clothing for their children. So the community spin-off from an economic model is much more powerful. So community benefit agreements, where as part of RFPs, request for proposals, they're building in not all of it. Okay, we're not putting people out of business here. We're talking 10%, 5%. You're going to hire people from this, or you're going to give an opportunity. So we have one, actually, I just had a call 2 weeks ago from a construction project in London. It's a major roadworks. They need someone to clean up the site every day in the morning.
Yeah.
I said, well, we can do that.
Yeah.
We've done outdoor work. We can do that. So that'd probably create a half-time job for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's great. We're seeing more and more of that going forward. We're seeing more activism on public companies. Exxon's a great example recently. So I kudos to everybody that's here and competing in this project. I think we're changing the world for the good, just in how we're thinking about the ways that business should interact with communities and with our environment. So I think that's great, and I know I'm looking forward to seeing some of the pitches over the next little while. We have a couple questions, Paul, so I'm just going to throw them at you. Some of the, not easy questions. Would you say there is a key factor when you think about, what drives success in a social enterprise? Is there one key thing, or maybe one or two, if you could think about it?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to where we kind of started. First of all, is it on mission, and is it having an impact on people? It's all about people. So that's the key thing. Is it sustainable in the long term, or is this a one and done?
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in one and done.
Yeah.
It has to be sustainable. And then, thirdly, are we leaving the community better? Is there other added community benefit to this? And that's critical from a nonprofit charitable perspective. Our mission, as broad as it may be, from everything from the social enterprise has been around a long time. Yeah. The YMCA is a social enterprise.
Yeah.
Your community orchestra, your community theater group, those are all social enterprises. They just didn't even call themselves that, but they earn income to be able to do good in our community, cultural good or social good. So those are the three things that I think are critical. I think when you do business planning, I have another matrix that we'll talk about another day maybe, but if your idea is in the complex and hard to, if you think of a quadrant, easy to implement, high cost up in that top right, I would say you want to give that a second thought, because it's going to be really tough to make it sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just add, actually, it's just maybe a summary of what you said, but in my mind, it's you're going to do what you say you're going to do. What's the key to success for a social enterprise? You do, and that gets back to that execution. You do what you say you're going to do, because people are involved because of the vision you're talking about, the purpose you're talking about, and they're signing on to that. So success comes when you live that and execute against it. To me. All right. This is something, Paul, I know you talked a little bit about, you've had some experience with. How do you move forward when your social enterprise doesn't succeed?
Well, that's a great question. You go into mourning. I'm not even being facetious. There's a grieving process that happens when an idea or maybe a dream dies. But you step back and you say, so what worked, what didn't work? And sometimes, we shut our business, I'll use one, we shut our construction business down. It had its most profitable year and I shut it down. We just didn't have the capacity to deliver on price, quality, and success. And one of the reasons for that was every time I get a really good lead hand who is on the ground executing, guess what would happen?
Yeah.
About 4 to 6 months later, because he's supervising laborers who are learning and growing in their skill. But I got to have one guy that really has his head screwed on. And sure enough, a contractor or a home builder would come along and they would hire them away and pay them 25% more than I could pay them.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't, there's a sustainability issue around leadership. And I couldn't be the site super every day. And frankly, give me a drywall. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, you know, so I'm a great project manager, but not so good on the framing and the drywall piece. So that's another component of it, right? Selecting the right leadership and having the right people available is mission critical. So we shut it down. Was it a success? I would say it was a moderate success. Was I disappointed? Absolutely. When the grocery store failed, even though I had been distant from it for a couple of years, the founder and I went for a glass of wine and kind of had a couple of, you know, sort of sad moments together because we're deep, deep friends and just disappointed. Like, what do we do wrong? What do we learn? But do we give up? No, we don't give up. Now we know what we would do differently.
Yeah.
And here's the irony of it. True story. I said, guys, you have to pivot to online grocery sales. This is 5 years ago. I said, you can reach your market, a bigger market, with online grocery sales. 24 months after it opened, President's Choice and Loblaws came out with online grocery sales. Can you imagine what kind of position they would have been in when the pandemic hit?
Yeah.
And you know, they didn't grab the vision, right?
Right. And I think that's a perfect example, Paul. And it is a tough question. And I think it's perfectly normal to go through a grieving period, for sure. You know what? You worked hard at this. It was a dream. It was a vision. But the other thing to remember, and it gets back to something Paul said earlier, is that it is around an innovation. You know, that's what you're doing. You're innovating. You're trying something new in the world. And we know that innovation success rate is not great, right? The chances are this is not going to succeed in the manner that you think it will. And so go into it knowing that's part of it. Okay. And now that doesn't mean give up, at the first sign of a wall or a bump or anything like that, because success is going to take resilience and it's going to take, hard knocks and getting back up again. But at the end of the day, you've tried everything you can and it doesn't succeed. Hey, what did you learn? Just like Paul said, what did you learn? How do I take that knowledge into the next one and do more and do better? But wow, you're not alone. Most of these will not succeed in the way that you envision them succeeding. And that's okay, because we're going to learn and we're going to do better next time. And as a people, we're going to move forward together. And that's the important part to remember in my mind.
One of the things that, and I don't know if you teach it in your program, the VULCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah.
And, I've been using that with boards of directors for, probably 4 or 5 years. And this year has taught us, if nothing else, that we're in a volatile world with uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And we have to become more agile and pivot to a world of vision, a world of clarity, and a world of agility.
Yeah.
And so I have a new VULCA, and that is totally different than the old one that we have used in the past. And quite frankly, it's true of organizations, it's true of us as individuals, whether it's on a personal level. We may have had a dating relationship that failed. Okay, let's take a pivot. What did I learn from this? Or if, we have relationships that goes like it apply. I am a psychologist. Okay, so what we learn at a micro level, we can actually apply at a macro level in business.
Yeah.
And I think there's something wonderful about that. So it's vision, understanding, clarity, and agility.
Yeah.
And so we don't get paralyzed by the old VOCA, we get energized by the new VOCA.
I love that. And it goes along, I think, with one of the things I've learned over the years, Paul, fits perfectly in that. Like, don't fall in love with your solution, right? Because it's about the problem you're trying to solve. And the best way to solve that is going to change over time, because people change, circumstances change. And so fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve, not the solution you come up with, because you can end up trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
And great leaders, and in the social service sector, I watched people that got on a horse 30 years ago. The horse died about 10 years ago, but they're still on it, hoping that it's going to resurrect. Great leaders are willing to shut it down.
Yeah.
And not give up, but reinvent.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's not that you failed, it's just that the world changed. Technology changes, people change, circumstances change. We have pandemics. The best solution today may not be what the best solution was yesterday or the day before. So if you have any questions, let me just throw this out there.
Our parents grew up with something called catalogs. Yeah. Eaton's catalogs, Sears catalogs, and that's where they would go. And then they all closed. In fact, my father closed the Eaton's catalog in 1972. He was the HR manager at Eaton's in 72. They just hadn't conceptualized the internet. The internet is a catalog where you don't hold the inventory.
Yeah.
It was the carrying costs that killed them.
Sure. Absolutely. We have time for another question or two if you want to type it into the Q&A aspect on the webinar. And while people are thinking about that, I have one here, Paul. In for-profit businesses in particular, we talk about exit strategies. Is that a term that even makes sense in social enterprise?
It's not one that I have used or have heard used in social enterprise. And I can think of a couple that, where the horse has expired and they did not have an exit strategy. Actually, they didn't have a sustainability strategy. Yeah. And you being here in town, the London, the orchestra, Symphony London years ago. Right. And, I was part of the final decision that put a nail in that one. Yeah. And certainly it would be classified under our social enterprise definition as one. They didn't have a sustainability. They didn't have a financial plan. They were funding current day operations out of future revenues, like next season's revenues, and that's gonna bite you. One day it's gonna bite you. That's an example of not having an exit strategy. Yep. So I think it's a good concept. With our construction, we had an exit strategy. In fact, I made one phone call to a builder and 3 of my 4 employees had a job the next week. Yeah. So we were able to wrap up, finish existing contracts, extract ourselves from the marketplace and move forward. Yeah. On a larger scale, you have to set aside some money because there's going to be wind up costs and you have to be able to fund that. But also I would say that on that, there's a reputational cost that you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
And so if you want to launch something else, then you need to deal with the reputational piece.
And reputation is maybe the entrepreneur's most precious asset, to be honest. Whether that's for profit, not for profit, you're selling a vision, and it's really people are investing in you and your capability, and you keeping your word in terms of pursuing that. I have, one someone just texted me and say an exit strategy is when you solve the problem. And I think, yeah, all right, I like that one.
Yeah. Except for there's a very wise prophet who told us 2,000 years ago that the poor you will always have with you. And there's certain needs in the world that will not go away.
Yeah.
And sometimes we help this person today, and hopefully, I'd love to work myself out of a job, but I'm not confident that that will ever happen.
Yeah.
As much as I might like to see that happen.
And I liked your answer too, Paul. I think, the idea of, look, we have metrics that we're following, we're measuring success. And when we see that we're no longer able to do it in the manner that we'd like, we have a plan to pivot or to wind down in a socially responsible way. And I think that's maybe the way I would think about exit in this sense. Okay, we have a couple of questions here. First one, and I know we only have time for probably one or two. How do you balance accepting sponsors while ensuring that their organization is also aligned with your core goals and mission?
Yeah, we have not had a lot of, well, that's not true. We've had some for-profit sponsors that have been very gracious in our startup of our community wood shop. They were in the construction business, or they were in the cabinet making business, or they sold us equipment, that was used in the shop. Those sorts of sponsors, that I think they're aligned with that.
Yeah.
We're pretty careful. We probably wouldn't have the Labatt's or the gambling industries, because that's some of the social issues that we may be dealing with in terms of addictions and those sorts of things. So
yeah.
We're pretty careful.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is something that entrepreneurs probably don't give enough time to, but you should be doing due diligence on those that are giving you funding or giving you sponsorship funding again. But it is your responsibility to do the due diligence on them, just like they're doing on you, and make sure it's not something that you'll regret down the road. You can never be 100% certain, but most of these folks will have a track record. And so you can look at their track record carefully, and you can ask perhaps if they're funders, other people, other causes that they've funded, talk to the leadership there and make sure that they've been aligned with where they wanted to go. So I think that's a.
I think there's also the employee side. I mean, we've lived through the Me to We scandal, and was I surprised at that from a charity point of view? No, because I knew employees who had worked there.
That's a shame. Well, I think we're out of time, Paul. Is there anything kind of last, message you'd want to leave the group with?
I would say this: don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to dream.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful message. The storytelling piece, the belief and having the passion to follow up on that try. And, the only thing I'd add to that is, the rational side, the execution, the go to market. Make sure you put your ducks in a row there, because if I believe in a cause, boy, I want you to be successful. And that's my passion in putting money behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Ruth, I want to thank you so much. And Monica, I know you were doing technical support behind the scenes. But Paul, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and bringing your expertise and sharing it with the group.
What a great conversation. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Monica and Ruth as well.
Thanks so much, Paul. Ruth, back to you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your insights with us. If your question wasn't answered, Paul and Eric's contact information is in the platform. As well, we will be putting up a code for today's session in the main session chat. So please be sure to check that out. And I will let you all go. Have a wonderful evening. And just a reminder for all the students, there is our interactive magic show at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have heard really great things. So if you're able to check it out, I really recommend going to it. All right, everybody.
Bye now.
Thanks, Paul.